The stars had always been silent. That was the greatest mystery that plagued the Galactic Council for millennia. Thousands of worlds, hundreds of species, all having achieved spaceflight within roughly the same epoch. All peaceful, diplomatic, having evolved beyond their primitive warlike tendencies. The Voth with their crystalline bodies and mathematical minds. The Illuri, empaths who communicated through color and light. The gas-dwelling Mithrans who crafted the most beautiful vessels that sailed between stars. All had achieved harmony long before reaching for the stars. And yet, the galaxy was mostly empty. Peaceful races met other peaceful races, and they wondered, was this the natural order? Did all sentient life eventually overcome violence? The ancient ruins found on dead worlds suggested otherwise, but those civilizations were long gone, leaving only whispers in stone and metal. That was the universe we knew. Until Earth. I remember where I was when the first contact report came in. Standing in the grand observation deck of the Council Station Harmony, watching the nebula storms through the vast crystalline viewport. My scales rippled with anticipation. As senior xenoanthropologist, first contacts were my specialty. But this one felt different from the moment Ambassador Threll approached, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with what I recognized as confusion. "Historian Ziv," she said, her translator clicking softly. "We've encountered something unprecedented." I turned from the swirling gases. Another aquatic species. The predictive model suggested the next system might. "They call themselves humans," Threll interrupted, her light patterns shifting to a warning red. "And they have warships, Ziv." I remember laughing. Actually laughing. The concept seemed absurd. Warships? In space? That's impossible. No species brings conflict beyond their atmosphere. The resource requirements alone would. "They have thousands," she continued. "Their first transmission to our contact vessel included military protocols. They asked about our weapons capabilities before they asked about our biology." The nebula's light suddenly seemed less beautiful, more ominous. There must be a translation error. No error. I reviewed it personally. She extended a data crystal. "They're sending a diplomatic team. The Council is assembling an emergency session." The data showed a small blue-green world, unremarkable except for one detail. It was surrounded by artificial satellites. Not scientific or communications networks like other worlds, but weapons platforms, defense grids, military installations. Their ships had armor, actual armor. And weapons, energy weapons, kinetic weapons, missiles with payloads designed specifically to destroy other vessels. Who builds such things? What kind of evolutionary path creates a species that reaches the stars while still bearing the tools of war? The humans arrived 3 cycles later. I was part of the reception committee. They stepped from their shuttle. Bictal, soft-skinned, visually indistinguishable from a dozen other species except for the uniformity of their clothing. What they called civilian attire was colorful, individualistic. But half of their delegation wore identical dark blue uniforms with insignia, ranking systems, and ceremonial weapons at their sides. Their ambassador, a female named Chen, smiled with teeth exposed. A gesture we would later learn was friendly, not threatening as it would be among most species. Beside her stood a tall male with stern features and watchful eyes, introduced as Admiral Taylor. "We come in peace," Chen said, using our standard greeting protocol perfectly. "But prepared for war," the Admiral added casually, as though commenting on the station's architecture. The silence that followed was profound. 300 cycles of peaceful galactic cooperation, and nobody knew how to respond to that statement. Council Elder Vrin finally spoke, his ancient voice trembling slightly. "War? With whom?" "The Galactic Council has maintained peace for." "Peace is a luxury," Taylor interrupted, his voice softer than I expected from his rigid posture. "One we hope to enjoy, but never assume." Over the following days, I interviewed them extensively. Their history was horrifying. continuous warfare, genocide, global conflicts that killed millions. And yet, also art, music, literature of profound beauty, compassion, sacrifice, love, all the higher emotions we recognized in ourselves, but coupled with capacity for violence that seemed impossible to reconcile with their advancement. How did you ever reach the stars? I asked Chen one evening, after reviewing Earth's blood-soaked history. Most species nearly destroy themselves during their atomic age. We nearly did too, she said, eyes focused on the nebula outside. Several times, actually. Then how? Because of the war, not despite it. She turned to me, expression solemn. Competition drives innovation. Our greatest technological leaps came preparing for conflicts or recovering from them. Terrible, but true. The Council debated for weeks whether to fully integrate humans into galactic society. Some feared their warrior nature. Others were fascinated by their resilience. I found myself oddly drawn to them. Their contradictions, their passion, their strange mixture of destruction and creation. Then the Scourge attacked. We dismissed the ancient warnings as myths. The destroyer race that periodically swept through the galaxy, eliminating civilizations that grew too prominent. Just stories explaining the mysterious ruins, until their massive ships emerged from the darkness beyond charted space and obliterated our outpost in the Kelton system without warning or communication. The peaceful races of the Galactic Council had no defenses, no warships, no weapons that could matter. 3 billion lives on colony world Ilara vanished in a day. Panic spread through the Council. Evacuation plans were made. Some suggested surrender, though the Scourge had shown no interest in communication. And then I watched as Admiral Taylor stood before the Council, his face grim but resolute. "You've never had to fight," he said simply. "We've never stopped preparing for it." Behind him, through the station viewport, hundreds of human vessels appeared from jump points. Warships, carriers, destroyers, a fleet larger than anyone had imagined, summoned from Earth and its colonies. "Humanity stands with the Council," Ambassador Chen announced formally. The Admiral's expression remained unchanged. "We need your infrastructure, your resources, and your cooperation. In return, we'll teach you something you've forgotten." "What might that be?" asked Elder Vryn. The Admiral's eyes reflected the distant starlight. "How to survive." As the human fleet moved into defensive positions around Council worlds, I realized that the universe was about to change forever. For better or worse, the peaceful races of the galaxy had met war incarnate, and now our survival might depend on embracing what we had evolved beyond. The question that keeps me awake during ship night as we travel to Earth for military strategic planning isn't whether the humans can save us. It's whether we'll recognize ourselves once they do. Earth's gravity felt heavier than the numbers suggested. Perhaps it was psychological, the weight of entering the homeworld of a predator species. Our delegation shuttle descended through cloud cover, revealing sprawling cities, vast oceans, and the scars of their history visible even from orbit. Ancient conflict zones, now green parks with memorials. Military bases converted to civilian use, then back again as the Scourge threat emerged. "First time on Earth?" asked Lieutenant Rivera, a dark-eyed human assigned as my liaison. Unlike many of her kind, she smiled rarely, but when she did, it transformed her face. "Yes," I admitted, my scales shifting to a nervous blue-green pattern. "I've studied your history extensively, but experiencing it firsthand is different." She nodded, understanding my unspoken apprehension. "Don't worry. Most of the scary stuff is just in our history books now." After a pause, she added, "Most of it, anyway. The capital city, they called it New Geneva, spread beneath us, a strange mixture of efficient design and chaotic growth. Unlike Council worlds with their careful urban planning, human cities evolved organically, buildings of different eras standing side by side. Beautiful and jarring simultaneously, like humanity itself. Our delegation was escorted to what they called the United Earth Defense Command, a sprawling complex of low buildings surrounded by green spaces. Security was evident everywhere, not just technology, but armed humans standing at attention. I'd never seen so many weapons in my life, yet the humans moved among them casually, as though they were simply furniture. The council representatives have been given clearance for the war room, Rivera explained, leading us down a corridor. Admiral Taylor specifically requested Historian Ziv's presence during strategic briefings. Ambassador Threll's light patterns flashed with surprise. May I ask why? Rivera's expression remained neutral. The Admiral believes understanding each other's history and cultural evolution is essential for effective cooperation. This isn't just about tactics, it's about bridging fundamentally different approaches to existence. The war room was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd expected something stark and utilitarian, like the human military vessels. Instead, we entered a circular chamber with a central holographic display surrounded by tiers of seating. Natural light streamed through high windows, illuminating art pieces from dozens of worlds, including, I noticed with surprise, perfect reproductions of Council masterworks. Admiral Taylor stood discussing something with a group of officers, his posture rigid even in apparent relaxation. When he saw us, he approached with measured steps. Historian Ziv, he said, inclining his head slightly. Thank you for coming. I hope your journey was comfortable. As comfortable as possible, while fleeing genocidal invaders, I replied, attempting human-style conversational levity. It fell flat. Taylor didn't smile, but something in his eyes softened fractionally. Indeed, we have much to discuss. He gestured toward the central display. The Scourge has now destroyed 7 outposts and 2 colony worlds. Their pattern suggests methodical expansion rather than random attacks. The hologram showed galactic sectors marked with red indicators where attacks had occurred. A pattern was emerging, not toward Council core worlds as feared, but along rimward sectors rich in specific resources. They're harvesting, said a new voice. A human female with gray-streaked hair entered, wearing simple civilian clothing that somehow commanded more respect than any uniform. Resource acquisition, not conquest or extermination. Dr. Sato, Taylor nodded. Our chief xenobiologist. She's been studying the Scourge debris we recovered. Dr. Sato approached our delegation with none of the careful distance most humans maintain from non-humans. They're biosynthetic, she said without preamble. Partially organic, partially mechanical. Highly adaptable, and very, very old. Threll's patterns shifted to alarmed yellows. How old? Based on material degradation rates and technology signatures. At least 50,000 years. Dr. Seto's eyes were intense. They're not just attacking. They're harvesting specific elements needed for their reproduction. Your worlds are being consumed as raw materials. The revelation sent ripples of horror through our delegation. Council member Vrin's tendrils curled inward, a sign of deep distress in his species. Then negotiation is, he began. Impossible, Taylor finished. You can't negotiate with a forest fire or a virus. The Scourge sees us as resources, not entities. I found my voice, but the ancient records, some civilizations must have survived their attacks. The archaeological evidence suggests they come in waves. Dr. Seto nodded. They expand, consume, retreat, possibly dormant periods. The ruins you found might be from civilizations that survived one wave, only to fall to another centuries later. Admiral Taylor activated a different holographic display, human military vessels in formation. We've mobilized our entire fleet. Every ship, every weapon. But it won't be enough. The silence that followed was leaden. What do you mean, not enough? Ambassador Threll asked. Your military capability exceeds anything we imagined possible. Taylor's face remained impassive. We've run the simulations. Conventional warfare won't stop them. We need something else. What we need, Dr. Sato said carefully, is to understand them better. And to do that, We need to capture one. Rivera, standing quietly until now, stepped forward. That's where Operation Spearpoint comes in. A joint mission, human military precision combined with Council scientific expertise. Taylor nodded. We're assembling a specialized team to infiltrate a Scourge harvester vessel. Council scientists, human special forces, high risk but potentially high reward. And you want me on this team? I said, suddenly understanding why I'd been brought here. Yes, Taylor confirmed. Your xenoanthropological expertise might help us understand their behavior patterns. If they're truly ancient, they might match legends or historical accounts in Council archives that haven't been properly interpreted. I felt the weight of Earth's gravity pressing down harder. I was a historian, an academic, not a soldier, not an operative. Rivera must have read my expression. No one's asking you to fight, Historian Ziv. Just to observe, to interpret, to help us understand what we're facing. Before I could respond, alarms blared throughout the complex. Taylor's posture shifted instantly, tension coiling through his body like a predator preparing to strike. Proximity alert, he said, moving toward a communication station. Scourge vessels detected at the edge of the solar system. The war room erupted into controlled chaos. Humans moving with practiced precision to stations, displays changing, voices calling out information in clipped tones. Ambassador Thrall's patterns had frozen in fear. They followed us to Earth. No, Taylor said grimly. This was always their destination. You were never the primary target. Dr. Sato's expression was grim. They're after Earth. They always were. And suddenly I understood. The peaceful races of the Council weren't enough. The Scourge hadn't retreated after consuming those colony worlds because they were satisfied. They were just preparing for the main course, the only species that had evolved to fight back. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of emergency preparations. Earth's orbital defense grid activated, civilian populations moved to underground shelters, and military vessels scrambled into defensive formations. I found myself swept up in the organized chaos, working alongside humans who showed remarkably little fear considering the circumstances. How can everyone remain so calm? I asked Lieutenant Rivera as she escorted me to yet another briefing. Your civilization is facing extinction. She glanced at me, her expression thoughtful. This isn't our first existential threat, Historian Ziv. Humanity has lived under the shadow of annihilation for most of our modern history, sometimes from external threats, often from ourselves. That sounds exhausting. It is, she admitted, but it builds resilience. We've had nuclear weapons pointed at our own cities for centuries. Asteroid near misses, plagues, climate disasters. The threat of death is woven into our cultural DNA. Before I could respond, we entered a smaller chamber where Admiral Taylor stood with a group of soldiers unlike any I'd seen before. Where most human military personnel wore standardized uniforms, these individuals were equipped with sleek, matte black armor that seemed to absorb light. Their faces were obscured by partial masks, and their eyes, the ones I could see, had the focused intensity of apex predators. Historian Ziv, Taylor nodded. Meet Fireteam Obsidian. Special Forces operatives specially selected for Operation Spearpoint. A tall figure stepped forward, removing a tactical helmet to reveal close-cropped hair and a face marked with thin scars. Commander Hawkins, she introduced herself. Her voice was surprisingly soft, contrasting with her imposing presence. My team will ensure your safety during the mission. Assuming we can even get to a Scourge vessel, I said. We've developed a plan for that, Taylor replied, activating a holographic display. It showed a massive Scourge harvester ship, a twisted, organic-looking structure larger than any Council vessel. Their flagship has established orbit around Mars and deployed smaller harvester units. They appear to be processing the planet's surface for raw materials before advancing to Earth. Dr. Sato entered, carrying data tablets. The Scourge vessels contain extraordinary electromagnetic shielding, but they emit periodic pulses of radiation, when transferring harvested materials. These create momentary vulnerabilities in their defensive systems. Commander Hawkins pointed to a specific area on the hologram. We've identified a potential entry point near what appears to be a collection chamber. A small stealth craft could approach during a radiation pulse and attach to the outer hull. And then what? I asked. We knocked politely. A ghost of a smile crossed Hawkins' face. We'd make our own door. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. A small team would infiltrate the Scourge vessel during its harvesting cycle, collect biological and technological samples, and attempt to identify vulnerabilities. Council scientists would analyze the Scourge's composition and behavior, while human special forces provided protection and extraction capability. Why me? I asked Taylor afterward. I'm a historian, not a scientist or soldier. Because you think differently, he replied. The council races have evolutionary perspectives that humans lack. You see patterns we might miss, and if the Scourge truly is ancient, your knowledge of galactic history could prove crucial. I wanted to refuse. Everything in my biology screamed against willingly entering a predator's den, but I remembered the billions already lost to the Scourge, peaceful beings who never had a chance to defend themselves. I'll do it, I said finally. The day of the mission arrived too quickly. Our transport, a human stealth vessel barely large enough for 12 occupants, waited in Earth's orbital dock. The team consisted of myself, 2 council scientists, Commander Hawkins, and 4 of her operatives. Lieutenant Rivera had volunteered as our tactical coordinator, monitoring from a command vessel at a safe distance. The journey to Mars was tense and silent. Through the viewport, I watched Earth recede, a beautiful blue-green orb that humans had nearly destroyed countless times, yet always managed to preserve. Human resilience was remarkable, if terrifying. Approaching target zone, announced the pilot. Radiation pulse expected in 3 minutes, stealth systems at maximum. Commander Hawkins gathered us for final instructions. Remember, we move as a unit. Council personnel stay between 2 operatives at all times. If we're compromised, emergency extraction protocols activate immediately. One of her team, a wiry man they called Bishop, patted a cylindrical device attached to his specialized backpack. And if things go completely sideways, we've got insurance. What kind of insurance? I asked. The kind that ensures the Scourge doesn't get our technology or biological material, Hawkins answered calmly. A suicide device. I felt my scales ripple with fear. Radiation pulse initiating. The pilot called. Approach vector locked. 30 seconds. The vessel shuddered as we accelerated toward the massive Scourge ship. Up close, its surface was even more disturbing. A complex matrix of metal and organic material that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. I could see why Dr. Seto had described them as biosynthetic. They weren't simply mechanical beings. They were something far more complex. 10 seconds. Commander Hawkins secured her helmet. Masks on. Atmosphere could be toxic. 5, 4, 3. The Scourge ship loomed larger in the viewport. 2, 1. Everything went silent as our vessel's systems powered down to avoid detection. We drifted the final distance on momentum alone, the only sound our own breathing inside our protective gear. The impact was gentle, barely a tap as specialized anchoring mechanisms engaged, securing us to the Scourge vessel's outer hull. For a terrifying moment, we waited to see if we'd been detected. Nothing happened. Phase 1 complete, Hawkins whispered. Bishop, you're up. Bishop approached the hull with a device that emitted a faint blue light. Material analysis in progress. It's extraordinary. Self-healing metal compounds interwoven with organic structures. Almost like. Like what? I prompted when he didn't continue. He looked up, expression troubled even behind his mask. Like it was grown rather than built. Working with practiced efficiency, the team created an entry point, not by cutting through the hull, but by temporarily suppressing its regenerative properties and peeling back layers. The opening revealed a dark tunnel that seemed to pulse with distant light. "Stay close," Hawkins ordered, as we entered the Scourge vessel. The interior defied conventional design. No corridors or chambers as I understood them, but organic-looking channels that branched and merged like blood vessels. The walls emitted a faint bioluminescence, and everything thrummed with subtle vibration. The air, tested cautiously, was breathable but carried unfamiliar metallic notes. We moved deeper, collecting samples and mapping our route. The council scientists murmured to each other in fascination and horror. This technology was beyond anything we'd encountered, not just advanced, but fundamentally different in its basic principles. "No signs of individual Scourge entities," reported one of Hawkins' team. "Could this entire structure be a single organism?" "Or a colony," suggested Bishop. "Like coral." We reached a larger chamber where the pulsing light grew stronger. The walls here were transparent in sections, revealing massive tanks of swirling metallic fluid. Within the fluid, shapes moved, half-formed, as if in development. "They're manufacturing themselves," whispered one of the council scientists, "using the harvested materials to create more Scourge units." Hawkins signaled us to document everything while her team established a defensive perimeter. I approached one of the transparent sections, drawn by a pattern that seemed almost familiar. And then I saw it, embedded in the growing Scourge forms. Symbols, markings, not random patterns, but deliberate designs that triggered recognition in my historian's mind. "These markings," I said, "I've seen them before. In the ancient ruins on Aloris Prime. We thought they were ceremonial. But there." A piercing alarm cut through the chamber. Red light flooded the space, and the walls themselves seemed to shudder. "We've been detected," Hawkins snapped. "Extraction Plan Alpha. Move now." As we turned to retreat, the entrance to the chamber sealed itself, the organic metal structure flowing like liquid to block our escape. "Alternative exit," ordered Hawkins, directing us toward another channel. That's when we saw them, emerging from the walls themselves. The individual Scourge units. Not mechanical drones as we'd expected, but twisted amalgamations of metal and organic tissue that moved with disturbing grace. Their forms were vaguely humanoid, but with too many joints, too many appendages, and where faces should be, only clusters of sensory organs that glowed with the same pulsing light as the ship. "Defensive formation," Hawkins shouted as her team raised weapons. The Scourge entities tilted their sensor clusters toward us in perfect unison. They didn't advance immediately, but seemed to be observing. And then, from everywhere and nowhere, came a sound. Not vocal communication as I understood it, but a modulated frequency that resonated through the chamber, through our bodies themselves. The council scientist beside me gasped. "They're trying to communicate." Lieutenant Rivera's voice crackled through our comms. "We're reading massive energy fluctuations. Something's happening aboard the vessel." The scientist frantically adjusted her translation device. "I think I can reconfigure this to interpret the frequency patterns, but I need time." "Time is something we don't have," Hawkins replied grimly as the Scourge entities began to advance. The first shots came from Bishop's weapon, precision bursts that struck the nearest entity. Instead of falling, the creature shuddered, its metallic organic surface rippling like disturbed water. The wound sealed almost instantly. "Conventional weapons ineffective," Bishop reported, voice steady despite the implications. Hawkins signaled a tactical retreat toward a narrow channel branching from the main chamber. "Fall back, controlled withdrawal." The team moved with practiced discipline, creating a defensive perimeter around the council scientists and me. The Scourge entities followed at a measured pace, neither rushing nor hesitating. Their movements carried an unsettling fluidity, as though governed by a single coordinating intelligence. "I need 2 more minutes," the council scientist, Dr. Nelra, insisted, fingers flying across her translation device. "The communication patterns are becoming clearer." "You've got 30 seconds," Hawkins countered. deploying a cylindrical device that emitted a crackling energy field across the passage behind us. This won't hold them long. As if to confirm her assessment, the first Scourge entity reached the energy barrier and simply pressed through it, its form distorting and then reconstituting on our side. The humans' weapons might as well have been ceremonial for all the lasting damage they inflicted. Secondary exit route compromised, reported another operative, voice tense. We're being herded. That's when I noticed something strange. The Scourge weren't attacking with the ferocity one would expect from predators. They maintained distance, containing rather than overwhelming us. And their sensory clusters kept shifting between us, specifically focusing on the humans. "Commander," I said urgently, "I don't think they're trying to kill us. At least not immediately." "They're studying." "Studying what?" Hawkins asked, never taking her eyes off the advancing entities. "Your team. Humans. They're especially interested in you." Hawkins frowned behind her mask. "Why Wold?" "I've got it," Dr. Nelra exclaimed, her translation device emitting a low hum. Partial translation established. It's asking a question. Over and over. "What question?" I demanded. The device crackled with distorted output, then stabilized into a simple phrase that chilled my scales. "Why do you still exist?" Lieutenant Rivera's voice cut through our comms. Command vessel detecting massive energy signatures from Earth orbit. The Scourge fleet is accelerating its timeline. Whatever you're doing in there, do it faster. The translation device continued processing, fragments of Scourge communication becoming clearer. Previous extinction, failure, adaptation, war function, impossible evolution. And suddenly, horrifyingly, I understood. They're not just harvesting. I said, voice barely above a whisper. They're eliminating threats. They've done this before, countless times. They're the reason peaceful races are all that remain in the galaxy. Hawkins glanced at me sharply. "Explain." "The ancient ruins, the dead civilizations we found throughout the galaxy. They weren't random victims. They were targeted because they developed like humans did. Warlike, competitive, capable of fighting back. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. The Scourge have been pruning the galaxy, removing species with the capacity for warfare before they can become threats." One of the Council scientists gasped. "That's why all known spacefaring species are peaceful. The others were systematically eliminated." "Except humans," Hawkins said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Exactly. Humanity developed in isolation, perhaps missed in previous sweeps. You're an aberration, a warlike species that reached the stars before being culled." I turned to Dr. Nelra. "Ask them how many cycles they've completed." She adjusted her device, broadcasting a modified version of their own communication frequency. The response came immediately, a burst of data that the translator struggled to process. "Thousands," she whispered. "They'd been doing this for hundreds of thousands of years." The implications were staggering. The Scourge weren't mindless harvesters, but galactic gardeners, systematically removing species they deemed dangerous to some greater cosmic order. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting against a force that had shaped galactic evolution itself. Rivera's voice cracked through our comms again, urgent now. "Multiple Scourge vessels breaking away from Mars. They're on a direct course for Earth's defense grid. Admiral Taylor is mobilizing everything we have. But the simulations don't." Static interrupted the transmission. "We need to get this information back," Hawkins decided. "Bishop, prepare the insurance package. We'll leave it as a parting gift." As Bishop moved to comply, the chamber shuddered violently. The walls themselves seemed to ripple, and the light pulsed in rapid, irregular patterns. "What's happening?" I asked, bracing myself against the nearest surface. The answer came not from our team, but from the translation device, now picking up a storm of Scourge communications. "Contamination detected. Anomalous code. System breach. Defense protocols compromised." Something's attacking the Scourge ship, Dr. Nelwer realized. From the inside. The confirmation came seconds later as Rivera's voice returned. Operation Trojan is active. I repeat, Operation Trojan is active. The virus package uploaded during your initial breach is spreading through their systems. Hawkins' expression revealed nothing, but her posture shifted subtly. Admiral Taylor had a backup plan. Our mission wasn't just reconnaissance. The stealth vessel carried an advanced cyber warfare package designed to infiltrate and disrupt biosynthetic systems. You knew? I asked, feeling a strange mixture of relief and betrayal. I knew there was a secondary objective. Need-to-know basis. She activated her team-wide comm. Extraction pathway opening. All teams converge on these coordinates. We have 3 minutes. As if responding to her words, a section of the chamber wall liquefied, revealing a direct passage toward the outer hull where our vessel waited. The Scourge entity's movements had become erratic, their coordination fractured as the virus spread through their collective consciousness. We moved quickly toward extraction, but as we approached the exit, a massive tremor shook the entire structure. The floor beneath us split open, and before anyone could react, Dr. Nelwer slipped through the widening gap. One of Hawkins' operatives lunged for her, catching her arm, but losing his footing in the process. Both dangled precariously over a chasm of swirling metallic fluid. "Hold on," Hawkins shouted, securing herself to fire a grappling line. Below them, the fluid began to rise, reaching tendrils upward like hungry fingers. But these weren't the coordinated movements we'd seen before. This was the autonomous defense system of a wounded organism, lashing out blindly. As Hawkins pulled them to safety, Rivera's voice returned, tone grave. "We have a new problem. The Scourge Collective is fragmenting. Individual vessels are breaking coordination and acting independently. Some are accelerating toward Earth, others air." She paused. "Admiral Taylor says there's a significant energy buildup in the Scourge mothership. They believe it's preparing a final countermeasure." "What kind of countermeasure?" I asked, already dreading the answer. The massive chamber shifted again, and through the transparent sections, I could see the dark side of Mars illuminated by an unnatural glow. The Scourge ship was channeling energy on a scale beyond anything our sensors could comprehend. "They're preparing to sterilize the system," came Admiral Taylor's voice, patched through directly now. "All hands evacuate immediately. Earth Defense Forces moving to intercept, but projections indicate." His voice cut off as another, more violent tremor rocked the ship. Cracks spread through the chamber walls, and atmospheric pressure began to drop. Emergency seals activated in our suits automatically. 60 seconds to extraction, Hawkins announced, leading us toward the hull breach. As we moved, I noticed one of the Scourge entities dragging itself after us, movements jerky and uncoordinated. Unlike the others, this one seemed focused, determined, and it was carrying something. "Commander," I called out, pointing. Hawkins spun, weapon raised, but hesitated when the entity made no aggressive move. Instead, it extended a limb, offering a small pulsing object that resembled a crystalline data core. The translation device crackled once more. "Take. Truth. Cycle breaks." Before anyone could react, a section of ceiling collapsed, crushing the entity beneath it. The crystal core rolled across the floor, stopping at my feet. Without thinking, I picked it up. "What are you doing?" Hawkins demanded. "It wanted us to have this," I said, securing the object in my sample container. Something about a cycle breaking. Her expression suggested she thought I'd lost my mind, but there was no time for debate. The extraction point was just ahead, our vessel still attached to the increasingly unstable Scourge ship. As we boarded and disengaged, the view through the viewport was apocalyptic. The massive Scourge mothership had begun to fold in on itself, its structure collapsing while energy continued to build at its core. "All vessels clear blast radius," came Admiral Taylor's command as our small craft accelerated away from Mars. Behind us, The Scourge mothership imploded with a silent flash, the vacuum of space swallowing the sound of destruction. But the energy wave that followed was anything but silent, registering across every spectrum as it expanded outward. "Brace for shockwave," our pilot warned. As the wave approached, I clutched the sample container, wondering what truth the dying Scourge had been so desperate to share, and whether any of us would survive to discover it. The shockwave hit like a physical wall, sending our vessel tumbling through space. Emergency systems flared to life, inertial dampeners straining against forces they were never designed to withstand. I was thrown against a bulkhead, my vision blurring as the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated wildly. "Hull integrity at 60%, the pilot announced. Voice steady despite the chaos. Engines offline. Switching to emergency power. Commander Hawkins pulled herself to a command console. All personnel report. Miraculously, everyone had survived the initial impact. Dr. Nelra was injured, a gash across her bioluminescent skin leaking pale fluid, but she waved away concern. "I'll regenerate. What's our status?" "Stranded," Bishop replied bluntly, studying the navigation systems. "Main engines are fried. Communication array damage. We're drifting." Through the viewport, I could see the remains of the Scourge mothership, not completely destroyed as I'd expected, but fractured into massive segments that glowed with residual energy. Mars hung in the background, its surface scarred by Scourge harvesting operations. "What about Earth?" I asked. "The other Scourge vessels?" Hawkins adjusted controls, trying to boost our communication systems. "Unknown. We need to re-establish contact with command." As the others worked to stabilize our damaged vessel, I found myself drawn to the sample container. The crystalline core pulsed with faint light, almost like a heartbeat. Against all better judgment, I removed it from the container. "What are you doing?" Dr. Neller asked, moving to my side. "That could be dangerous." "It wanted us to have this," I said. "To know." The crystal felt warm in my hands, its surface shifting slightly as though responding to my touch. Faint patterns emerged within its structure, not random, but ordered, like data storage. "It's some kind of archive," I murmured. Dr. Nelra studied it, her scientific curiosity overcoming caution. "The structure resembles quantum crystalline matrices we've theorized but never successfully created. It could store vast amounts of information. But how do we access it?" She considered for a moment, then reached for her translation device, perhaps the same frequencies they used to communicate. Before she could complete the adjustment, the crystal flared brightly. A beam of light projected from its core, forming into a three-dimensional display that filled the cabin. Images flashed by too rapidly to comprehend. Star maps, strange symbols, biological diagrams, scenes of worlds I didn't recognize. And then it stabilized, showing a being unlike the Scourge entities we'd encountered. This creature was almost elegant in its construction, with a clearly defined form that seemed neither fully organic nor mechanical, but a perfect synthesis of both. "Attention survivors," it began, its voice translated directly into our minds, rather than through audible sound. "This message has been encoded to activate only in the presence of dual nature species, those who balance creation and destruction." Everyone in the cabin froze, transfixed by the projection. "I am." The translation faltered, producing a sound impossible for our biology to process. "I was architect of renewal, creator of what you call the Scourge. This record contains truth denied to countless generations. The cycle must end." The image shifted, showing a star map of the galaxy as it existed hundreds of thousands of years ago. "We were not always as you see us now. Once we were like you, biological, individual, mortal. When we discovered the great filter that had claimed countless civilizations before us, we sought a solution to ensure life would continue in the galaxy." The projection displayed a terrible image. Entire solar systems consumed by what appeared to be living darkness. The devourers came from beyond the galactic rim. entities of pure consumption that fed on sentient life and the energy of thought itself. Conventional warfare proved useless. Only by transforming ourselves, becoming the perfect synthesis of biological adaptation and technological advancement, could we drive them back. Commander Hawkins had abandoned her repair efforts, moving closer to the projection. You're saying the Scourge were created as a defense force? Yes. We succeeded in repelling the Devours, but at terrible cost. Our consciousness fragmented, our purpose corrupted. The original architects lost control of their creation. What began as protection became purification. The Scourge identified a pattern. Species that evolved through competition and warfare eventually destroyed themselves or others. Logic dictated that such species must be culled before reaching their destructive potential. The crystal displayed countless worlds being systematically sanitized by early Scourge vessels. A splinter of original consciousness remained, preserved in this archive, watching in horror as our creation became the very threat we sought to counter. For millennia, we have waited for a species capable of ending the cycle, one with both the warrior's strength to fight and the wisdom to create rather than destroy. The projection focused on Earth, then panned out to show the Scourge fleet positioned around it. Humanity is not the first to resist, but it is the first to successfully disrupt the Scourge collective. The virus you deployed has fractured their unified consciousness, creating an opportunity that will not come again. Suddenly, our vessel's communication system crackled to life. Admiral Taylor's voice came through, strained but clear. Repeat, all survivors respond. Earth defense grid holding temporarily, but Scourge vessels are adapting. Estimated breach in 47 minutes. Bishop activated our emergency beacon. Admiral, this is Fire Team Obsidian. We've survived, but we're stranded. And sir, we've made contact with something else, something that created the Scourge. There was a long pause before Taylor responded. Understood. We're tracking your signal. Extraction impossible at this time. All vessels engaged in defense. The crystalline projection continued. The remaining architects have embedded a shutdown protocol within the Scourge collective. A final failsafe never implemented due to our fragmentation. This crystal contains the command codes, but they must be delivered to the heart of each remaining Scourge vessel simultaneously. That's impossible, Hawkins said. There are dozens of ships, and we can't even reach one. The projection shifted again, displaying Earth's defense grid. Your species has already created the means of delivery. Your communication network can be modified to broadcast the shutdown frequency, but it requires direct interface with the original architect consciousness, this crystal, at your planet's primary transmission hub. Admiral Taylor, still on the comlink, had heard everything. The Global Defense Network Control Center could broadcast across the entire system, but you'd need to get that crystal there physically, and you're stranded millions of kilometers from Earth. I looked at the crystal, then at the human Special Forces team. These warriors from a species that had somehow survived when so many others had fallen. There must be a way. That's when Lieutenant Rivera's voice broke through on a separate channel. Commander Hawkins, this is Rivera. I've overridden the command vessel's protocols. I'm coming to get you. Lieutenant, that's a negative, Taylor barked. You are ordered to maintain position. With respect, sir, we're already on approach. The Scourge vessels are focused on Earth's defenses. This is our only window. Rivera's voice held that distinctly human quality I'd come to recognize, stubborn determination in the face of impossible odds. Through the viewport, I saw a vessel approaching, larger than our damaged craft, moving with purpose through the debris field. ETA 3 minutes, Rivera announced. The crystalline projection flickered. The architect's consciousness is fading. This archive will soon destabilize. You must hurry. As Rivera's vessel docked with our damaged craft, the humans moved with coordinated efficiency, transferring our team and essential equipment. The crystal's projection had dimmed significantly, its message becoming fragmented. One last truth, it said as I carefully transported it to the new vessel. The Devourers were not destroyed, only contained. Beyond the rim they wait. The Scourge's corruption has weakened the barriers. If they return, only united species, both peaceful and warlike, will survive. The implications sent a chill through my scales. The Scourge, for all their destructive history, had been holding back something far worse. Rivera's vessel detached and accelerated toward Earth, pushing its engines beyond safety parameters. The journey that should have taken days was compressed into hours of white-knuckle navigation through debris fields and radiation storms. Admiral Taylor coordinated our approach, clearing a path through Earth's defensive grid as Rivera piloted us toward the Global Defense Network's primary facility, buried deep beneath what humans call the Rocky Mountains. The Scourge vessels are starting to breach our outer defenses, Taylor reported as we entered Earth's atmosphere. Whatever you're going to do with that crystal, do it fast. The landing was more controlled crash than proper docking, the facility's emergency systems barely managing to accommodate our damaged vessel. Commander Hawkins led our team through corridors filled with frantic human personnel, the crystal clutched carefully in my hands as its light continued to fade. We reached the central transmission chamber, a massive spherical room dominated by a complex array of equipment that formed the heart of humanity's defense network. Engineers worked frantically under Taylor's direction, modifying systems to accommodate the alien technology we brought. "We've configured the array to accept the crystal," Taylor said, indicating a newly modified interface port. "But we have no idea what will happen when we activate it." I placed the crystal in the port, its surface now almost completely dark. Neither do we. As technicians made final adjustments, I turned to Commander Hawkins. "If this works, if we survive this, will humanity return to its warlike ways?" She considered the question with unexpected thoughtfulness. "War shaped us, but it doesn't define us. We fought because we had to. Perhaps now we can fight only when we need to." The crystal suddenly flared with renewed energy as it connected to Earth's global network. Displays throughout the chamber lit up with unfamiliar code as the architect's consciousness flowed into human systems. "Broadcast commencing," announced a technician. On monitors around the chamber, we watched as the signal radiated outward from Earth, reaching each Scourge vessel in succession. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The ships didn't explode or collapse. They simply stopped, their organic mechanical surfaces stilled, energy signatures dropping to minimal levels. "It's working," Taylor said, disbelief evident in his voice. Then the crystal pulsed one final time, so brightly that everyone shielded their eyes. When the light faded, the crystal had transformed, no longer a simple data storage device, but a complex, evolving structure that continued to integrate with Earth's systems. "What's happening?" Taylor demanded. The answer came not from any of us, but from the facility's communication system, now speaking with the voice of the architect. "Integration complete. The architect's consciousness has merged with your defense network. The shutdown protocol was successful, but it is only the beginning." Displays around the room shifted to show the edge of the solar system, where a shimmering distortion had appeared. The Devourers sensed the Scourge's absence. "The barrier weakens. You have perhaps one of your years before they test their constraints." I looked at the humans around me, these strange, complicated beings who had survived against all odds. Then at Ambassador Threll and the other council representatives who had witnessed everything. Two evolutionary paths, peaceful and warlike, forced to confront a universe more dangerous than either had imagined. "Then we have work to do," I said. In the months that followed, I witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history, the rapid evolution of cooperation between fundamentally different civilizations. The council races evolved for harmony and collective progress, and humanity, shaped by competition and conflict, formed an alliance unlike anything recorded in our archives. I remained on Earth as the official council liaison, establishing my office in New Geneva near the Global Defense Network headquarters. The integration of the architect's consciousness with Earth's systems had created something entirely new, a hybrid intelligence that retained the ancient wisdom of the creators while adopting humanity's adaptive creativity. Admiral Taylor now led the newly formed Galactic Defense Initiative, his tactical mind perfectly suited to preparing for the threat beyond the Rim. Commander Hawkins headed the first Joint Human Council Special Operations Division, training peaceful species in the arts of war while teaching humans the value of restraint. "You look troubled," Lieutenant Rivera observed one evening as we stood on the observation deck overlooking the repurposed Scourge vessels. The dormant ships had been towed into Earth orbit, their biosynthetic technology carefully studied and modified under the architect's guidance. "I've been a historian for 90 years, I replied, my scales shifting to a contemplative blue. I documented the past, analyzed patterns, preserved knowledge. Now I find myself helping to write a future that contradicts everything I thought I knew about civilization's natural progression." Rivera smiled. "Evolution isn't linear, Ziv. That was always humanity's advantage. We never assumed there was only one path forward." Below us, teams of human and council engineers worked together, retrofitting a Scourge harvester into what would become the first of a new class of vessels, designed not to conquer or destroy, but to defend against the coming threat. The irony wasn't lost on me. Weapons of extermination transformed into shields for life. Ambassador Thrill approached, her bioluminescent patterns displaying a complex mixture of emotions that would have been unreadable months earlier. I'd learned to recognize the nuances of her species' communication, just as she'd adapted to human body language. "The council vote was unanimous," she announced. "The Concordance Treaty has been ratified. All member worlds will contribute resources to the defensive preparations." "Even the Voth?" I asked, surprised. The crystalline beings have been the most resistant to militarization, especially the Voth. Their mathematical models confirmed the architect's predictions. The probability of devourer incursion reaches 97% within 3 standard years. She paused. They volunteered their crystalline technology for weapons development. The news should have disturbed me. Peaceful beings embracing war. But instead, I felt a curious sense of rightness. The galaxy was correcting a long imbalance. Dr. Sato joined our group, carrying data tablets. In the months since our mission, she had worked tirelessly with council biologists to understand the Scourge's biosynthetic nature. "We've made a breakthrough," she announced without preamble. "The dormant Scourge units aren't just shutting down. They're reverting to an earlier state. Their base programming is resurfacing." "What does that mean?" Rivera asked. "It means they're remembering their original purpose," came a voice from nearby. Admiral Taylor approached, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. "The architect's consciousness is helping them remember what they were before corruption." Dr. Sato nodded. "Some units are beginning to display individual awareness. Cooperation. They're evolving backward toward their creator state." The implications were staggering. Not just allies in the coming conflict, but redemption for beings that had been trapped in a corrupted purpose for countless millennia. 6 months after our return from the Scourge vessel, the first Joint Human Council military exercises began in the outer solar system. I observed from a command vessel as ships of dozens of designs, sleek Council science vessels now equipped with defensive capabilities, rugged human warships, and modified Scourge units piloted by volunteer crews, maneuvered in complex formations. Bishop stood beside me, now serving as a training liaison for Council species. "They learn quickly," he remarked as an Ailuri lightship successfully executed an evasive pattern, "especially once they get past their initial resistance. It goes against everything they've evolved to be." I reminded him. He considered this. Maybe. Or maybe every species has both paths within them, just expressed differently. Peace and war. Creation and destruction. We never abandoned art or science during our most violent periods. Perhaps your people never fully abandoned the capacity for conflict. They just submerged it. His observation stayed with me as I compiled the official historical record of these unprecedented events. In my private quarters that evening, I reviewed footage from throughout the galaxy. Council worlds establishing defensive systems, human military advisors teaching combat techniques to species that had never known violence, scientists of all races collaborating on weapons technology that could affect entities from beyond our understanding of physics. A message arrived from Dr. Nelra, now leading research on the dormant Scourge units. "You should see this." Attached was a video feed from a containment facility where a Scourge entity, smaller than those we encountered, its form more defined and less twisted, was communicating through a modified version of the translation device. "We remember our purpose," it stated, its movements more fluid, almost graceful compared to the jerky motions I recalled. "We were guardians once. We can be again." 1 year after our mission, I stood with Admiral Taylor, Commander Hawkins, and representatives from 27 species as the first new-generation defense vessel launched. Named Concordance, it incorporated technology from every major civilization, Council biological systems, human tactical designs, and regenerative Scourge components. At its heart was a crystal similar to the one we'd recovered, containing a fragment of the architect's consciousness. A historian shouldn't have favorite moments in time, I told Taylor as we watched the magnificent ship rise toward the stars. "We're supposed to maintain objective distance, but I confess, I'm glad to be witnessing this." He smiled slightly. Still rare for him. "We're not just making history, Ziv. We're correcting it." That night, a celebration united diplomats, scientists, and warriors from across the galaxy. Species that had never understood conflict danced alongside humans who had never known true peace. The distinctions were blurring, not erasing what made each unique, but creating something stronger through combination. I found myself on a balcony overlooking the gathering, recording observations for posterity when Lieutenant Rivera joined me. "Writing the official account?" she asked. "Trying to. It's difficult to maintain historical objectivity when you're personally involved." She laughed. "That's always been humanity's approach to history. Messy, subjective, contradictory. We preserve different perspectives rather than searching for a single truth." "Perhaps that's wiser," I admitted. The Scourge believed in a single path. Their corruption came from certainty. Rivera leaned against the railing, looking toward the stars now dotted with the lights of ships preparing for a war that might not come for years, but would certainly arrive. "You know what I find strangest about all this? How quickly it's starting to feel normal. Humans learning tranquility from the Illuri, the Voth designing weapon systems, former enemies becoming allies. Evolution in action," I replied. "Though I wonder what we'll evolve into." The answer came 18 months later when our long-range detection grid, enhanced with architect technology, registered the first disturbance beyond the galactic rim. A ripple in space-time that matched ancient records of devourer activity. I stood in the Global Defense Network Control Center as the alert came in, surrounded by beings from dozens of worlds, some naturally peaceful, some naturally warlike, all now united in common purpose. On the main display, the architect's consciousness manifested as a shifting pattern of light. "It begins," it announced, earlier than predicted. The Devourers sensed the change in the Scourge. They will test the barriers soon. Admiral Taylor's expression didn't change as he activated the galaxy-wide alert system, another innovation that would have been impossible without cooperation between human military protocols and Council communication networks. "Are we ready?" I asked him quietly. "No," he answered with unexpected candor. "But we're more ready than we would have been, and we improve every day." As the alert spread across inhabited systems, I watched the responses flood in from monitoring stations. No panic, no chaos. Instead, calm, coordinated preparation as defense fleets moved into position and civilian populations followed carefully rehearsed protocols. The peaceful races had learned to fight. The warlike had learned restraint. Together, they had found a middle path that neither could have walked alone. 2 years to the day after our fateful mission aboard the Scourge vessel, I completed my official historical account. As per tradition, I read the conclusion aloud to a gathering of those who had been present for the pivotal events. When peaceful races met war incarnate, the galaxy trembled at the contradiction. Two evolutionary paths, one shaped by harmony, one forged in conflict, seemed fundamentally incompatible. Yet in this meeting, we discovered a truth the Scourge in their corruption had forgotten: that life's greatest strength lies not in purity of purpose, but in diversity of approach. The coming conflict with the Devourers remains uncertain. We cannot know if our preparations will prove sufficient against entities that exist beyond our full comprehension. But we face this challenge not as separate species divided by our differences, but unified through them. The humans taught us that sometimes you must fight to preserve peace. We taught them that understanding your enemy can be as powerful as defeating them. Together, we remember what the architects learned too late: that guardianship without wisdom becomes tyranny, and that strength without compassion becomes monstrous. Whatever comes from beyond the rim will not find easy prey divided by philosophical differences, but a galaxy that has embraced both creation and destruction, peace and war, as necessary aspects of survival. History is rarely kind to those caught in its pivotal moments. But in this moment, as I record these words, I find myself grateful to be a historian in an age where history itself is being rewritten. Not with a single hand, but with many, belonging to beings whose differences have become their greatest strength. As I concluded, the architect's consciousness manifested briefly in the center of the chamber. Its form had evolved over the months, becoming more defined while still maintaining its fluid nature. "The cycle breaks," it said simply. "What comes next has never been written." And in that moment, surrounded by humans and aliens, warriors and diplomats, I understood the fundamental truth that would define our future. In a universe of endless threats, our greatest defense was never meant to be peace alone or war alone, but the wisdom to know when each is necessary and the courage to choose correctly. The stars are no longer silent. They speak now in many voices, some gentle, some fierce, all united. And whatever waits beyond the darkness will find us ready, not as the galaxy the Scourge tried to create, nor as the one that existed before them, but as something new, something stronger, something worth fighting for.